And good evening, everyone. Once again, my name is John Tabor. I'm the president of Loudon Photo Club. And tonight's speaker night for the 9th of March 2023 is Panoramic Photography, Methods and Examples in Virginia and the Nation. Tonight's speaker is Mr. Ben Greenberg. Ben is a lifelong resident of Virginia who moved to Charlottesville for the third time in 2002. He grew up in Richmond and lived most of his adult life there. His passion for photography began in 1970 when his eldest son was born and he was lent a totally manual Kodak Retina C camera to photograph. From this beginning, his fascination and commitment to photography grew quickly, and it wasn't long before he began capturing images of his family and the world around him. He has now photographed scenic vistas in Virginia, the Mid-Atlantic area, and many locations in the United States for 40 years. The last 35 as a freelance professional photographer. His carefully crafted landscape photographs have won local and national awards and competitions and have been exhibited in numerous individual and group shows. They've also been featured in diverse publications and purchased for scores of private collections. His images are currently represented in 3 galleries and 2 other shops in Virginia. He also enjoys exhibiting his landscape photographs in selective outdoor arts and crafts shows such as the Crozet Arts and Crafts Festival in Crozet, Virginia, in the spring and the fall, and Arts in the Park in Richmond in the spring. His primary subjects are the scenic vistas of mountains, landscapes, rivers, lakes, and shorelines of Virginia and the nation. Tonight, Mr. Ben Greenberg.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. And for those who may not have been there before, that the city name there for the show was Crozet. That's how they pronounce it, and that's about 14 miles from Charlottesville, where they have spring and fall shows, outdoor shows. Excuse me, I'm trying to get my bearings now, as with all the problems I had trying to connect with y'all, and I'm now on my wife's computer, laptop, which is pretty different from mine, but I think everything's going to work out fine. I'm crossing my fingers. First, let me just ask, can everybody hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Yes.
Okay, very good. I have a presentation that I have given before, but I have modified this one significantly. I've updated it considerably, and I have a lot of images I want to show you, and but I also have some content, some subject matter that I think you'll find interesting, to help you with panoramic photography and the issues involved, and things you might need to look out for, and problems you might want to prevent, and so forth and so on. But first, I would love to ask, and mind you, for whatever reason, I only have a few pictures of y'all on my screen, but I'd love to have some idea how many of you have actually taken panoramic photographs or cropped images into panoramic photographs in the past.
Yes.
I've got about 8 pictures, and all the rest I have is just names. And so I saw 2 hands go up. Well, that's not surprising. And I'm sorry, I got another hand signal from Greg, and so forth. So let me bring up my presentation, and rather than using preliminary discussion, and we'll bring it up, and then that'll give me what I need for what I'd like to share with you today. Okay, and let me fix that. All right, let's see here. I want to see if I can't move the information at the top, because it's going to interfere with some of my titles, I'm afraid. I'm trying to figure out how to do that. Move air pictures. Can everybody Oh, okay. Thank you for sending out that poll. Can everybody see that the mute and stop video and participants and new share and so forth at the top of this, of the picture of, that I'm showing
No,
you?
it's
No.
not shown on our end.
Oh,
No,
it's
we
only
only
showing on
see the
mine.
single, we only see the single slide.
Yeah, you're
Oh,
good to go, Ben.
okay, that's great. Then I'm not going to worry about it. It just, it's bothering me. Well, we'll find out soon if it blocks anything that I want to bring up.
So here are the results of the real snap poll that we just did.
Oh, okay. Very good. So I have some experienced panoramic photographers. That's good. And so you want to handle questions, Q&A at the end of my presentation?
It's up to you. If you'd like to save them till the end, we can do that. Or if you want people to ask as we go along, we can certainly entertain that as well.
If it's relevant to what I'm discussing at the time, I don't mind receiving questions. How would they normally be given to me?
Well, I'll be monitoring the chat, but if somebody wants to go on audio and ask you a question, we can do that too.
Okay, I'm fine either way. But if it's not related to what we're discussing at that point, then you might want to hold those till the end. So what I'd like to share with you. Oh boy, just excuse me 1 second here. All right, let me see, try this. I'm using the normal down and arrows that I use on my computer, and for whatever reason, there we go. Okay, yeah, it is covering some of my title. Trying to figure what I can do about that.
You can grab that where it says there's a little bar that says where it says stop share. You can grab that little green bar and drag it anywhere you'd like.
I'm sorry, where it says what?
That bar that you're looking at at the top of your screen.
Yeah.
You should be able to drag that off to the side or
Stop
minimize
share.
it. Yeah, don't click stop share or we won't see it. But you can grab next to stop share and click and drag it somewhere else if that's more convenient.
Okay. Let me see if I can figure out how to do this.
And there's also an option to minimize that bar.
Would that be under more?
Try that. There may be there. Can't remember off the top of my head. I have to look at it.
Ben, we can see Great Blue Heron on a misty James River, Richmond, Virginia.
Yeah.
I see an entire
But
slide.
unfortunately, I can't, and I've got some new titles that are going to be blocked. I don't. I'm trying to figure out where to grab it. Oh, wait a minute, I may have it now. Let's see. I'm going to pull this down I can't get rid of it, can I?
You can't make it go away, but you can make it smaller. So you can make it so the big ribbon of buttons does not appear.
I don't see how might I do that?
All right, tell you what, I'm going to try sharing my screen real quick, just get that answer real quick. So when you get it up.
I just brought it down to the bottom. I think I might be okay.
Okay.
And we'll find out. I think the bottom will be in better shape, but if it's not, then we'll go to another plan.
All right, you got it.
I appreciate that. Thank you. I'm sorry about that. Okay. Oh, it disappeared. The reason why I'm showing you this picture first is because this is obviously not a panoramic, but it's a photograph I shot in the late 90s. And it became a very important photograph to me, but only after I actually discovered panoramic photography, and I converted this to a panoramic photograph.
Hey, Ben, can you hear me?
I'm sorry, can you hear me?
I can hear you, but I'm not seeing your presentation.
Oh.
Try sharing your screen again. Make sure that.
Okay.
Because when I started sharing my screen, it made that ribbon disappear on your screen.
All right. Can you see my screen now?
Not yet.
Not yet. Okay. Well, I seem to have. Well, maybe what I've done is I've lost the connection
No, no,
to Zoom.
no, you haven't lost the connection. We can still hear you on Zoom.
No,
Try,
we can still see you.
Yeah,
You haven't
so
lost the connection.
Well, that's
just, yeah,
not what I want you to do.
click the share button again and pick your screen, share it again.
I'm sorry, I've got to minimize what I'm seeing now to see if, okay, now I can go to the share screen. Let's try that again.
And that bar is probably going to be back on your screen again.
Yeah, it is, but it's on the bottom, so that might be okay. We'll find
We
out.
can see your slides again.
But do you see the single slide or
Yep.
whole, much
Single.
more?
Actually, we're looking at your entire PowerPoint.
That's what I figured.
Okay, so when you go in slideshow mode, we'll be good.
Well, now I have to move this further because it's interfering with my ability to click on the slideshow
You
button.
can also press F5 and go to slideshow mode.
Oh, F5,
well,
that's right.
if you're Windows.
You are right. Wait a minute, I think it's Alt F5. But F5 is not working that way, so let's try Alt F5.
Okay. It should be, if you're on a laptop, you may need to hold down the function key.
All right, I'm sorry, hold on. Shoot. Okay, I was able to move this. Now let me get access to it.
Yep, that's the way to do it.
Okay, now you see the single slide.
Yes, we do.
Anything else?
Nope.
Okay, okay, let me get my.
We're off to the races now.
Yeah, I can tell. So as I said, this picture is a picture that has actually became one of my first and is still one of my favorite photographs, probably my favorite photograph, once it was converted to a panorama, only by cropping some of the bottom and a very, very little bit on the top. And this is the panoramic version. Do you see that?
Yes, we do.
Okay, thank you. And this panoramic version is, I say, is my favorite photograph. It's also on the cover of my book. I have a coffee table book I published in 2014 called Natural Virginia, with 122 panoramic photographs all over the state of Virginia. And this is on the cover. And I actually did a poll on Facebook and elsewhere to find out which people recommended to put on the cover. This is the one I wanted, and fortunately, everyone agreed, or almost everyone. And so this is on the cover of my book. If you see it in a bookstore, you'll know that's my book. And unfortunately, I've done three printings, three very successful printings, and I now have very few books left. And I'll probably be running out in a few months. UVA Press put it in the bookstores all over the state, and I'm actually running out very much faster than I expected, but I'm not going to print it anymore because I'm working on a second book on public lands in Virginia, natural public lands. Think of all the national, state, and local parks and nature preserves and wildlife management areas and so forth and so on. We're so fortunate in Virginia to have these wonderful public lands, and I think it's about time we have a great book that highlights them and has great images to help people understand what a treasure they are in Virginia. So that's what I'm working on now. The only reason it's not out yet is because I lost a publisher to the pandemic, unfortunately. Now, to tell you, I would like to just share a few thoughts about how I got involved in panoramic photography. I had never even thought about taking a panoramic photograph until I walked in a camera store in Charlottesville called Pro Camera. And in their used camera case was a Fuji G617. This is a camera that used 120 or 220 film and took panoramic photographs that were 2¼ by almost 6 3/4 inches. So imagine a slide that is that big, and with that kind of it's probably double-digit size larger than 35 millimeter, probably about 10 to 12 times larger, or yeah, at least. And I saw that camera, and I just suddenly thought about what it'd be like to get involved with panoramic photography, and I bought this used camera, not inexpensive, of course, but I thought that would be worth a try. And I went that late, within 3 or 4 days, I went on a trip to Great Smoky Mountains National Park, took the camera with me, and I took a photograph, the very first panoramic photograph I ever took. I took there, and I want to show it to you right here. And this is at the Roaring Fork River in near Gatlinburg, Tennessee. It's of course, the Smokies, I don't have to tell you how great that location that is for photography. Well, I didn't know anything about the Roaring Fork, and not a whole lot about the Smokies. And I went down there and I saw this. I actually parked my car in a place I couldn't see anything because of a hillside. I walked over the hillside, over the hill, and this is the scene I saw. And I just couldn't believe it. And so I immediately worked on setting up the picture and taking the picture. And I was really excited about it, because to get a diagonal on a panorama, I think is probably very unusual. And I just thought the composition was just phenomenal, in addition to the beauty of the scene. And I actually ran into another photographer who was there photographing in the same location. And he knew what he was doing. He was a former professional, as I understood it. And he wanted to see what I was doing. He had never been involved with panoramic photography, and he looked through my panorama, or maybe he had, but he had never seen anybody try to take a picture like this, I think. And he looked through my viewfinder. This was a rangefinder. This was not an SLR. And he looked through it, and he turned to me and he said, "I would never have thought of taking a picture in a panoramic picture like that." And I thought to myself, maybe I made a mistake. Maybe I did something wrong. But I immediately realized maybe I just didn't know enough about panoramic photography and the limitations of it to think a bit that this could have been wrong or not a way to photograph it. Because I felt, like I said, I fell in love with the picture almost immediately. And so I thought I was really onto something. And it wasn't long after after I took that trip, I started looking through my photographs that I've been shooting for many years, especially in recent years in terms of the natural world. And I began to see panoramas in my standard photographs. With some cropping, I started to see these panoramas that I wanted to turn into panoramas and see if I like them as much or more or less than my standard pictures. So I quickly got into panoramic photography. I'm going to share a little content first in the first part of the presentation to help you understand some of the issues. Some of the content will be familiar to you. Some of it may not be. I hope it'll be new information or helpful information to you. So I'm going to go beyond this picture. And that bar is blocking part of my screen at the bottom. Well, I think I can figure it out. This is something I think is relevant in terms of the things I've learned from panoramic photography. And the first thing is how many scenes that I have photographed in a standard version could also be made into panoramas and good, really quality photographs, but also scenes I could photograph as panoramas and as standard photographs, because there are different ways you could, as you know, compose any number of scenes. And sometimes the exact same photograph in a standard, just with a more narrow, wide version, can be a terrific panorama as well. And so I started to see that and do that a lot. And you'll see some of these photographs, these images that can work both ways in this presentation. And I'd also like to suggest that if the picture doesn't have, if the image that you're trying to get, if the scene you're trying to photograph is not a dynamic scene, it's not a strong scene, and isn't going to yield a strong standard photograph, it's certainly not going to yield a strong panorama. It's just not going to work. Panoramas don't solve the problems that you have that are made by selection of scenes to photograph that really are not very strong in the first place. I've been teaching a class and recently a class that discusses the issue of what's the most important things you need to learn about aesthetics in photography, not the technical side. So you can get great photographs on a regular basis. And to me, the most important thing that decision a photographer makes is what he or she chooses to photograph. I believe that very strongly. And if you don't choose good subject matter, you're not going to, I don't believe you're going to get a great photograph. I think that's the most important decision, but there are a lot of other decisions in terms of composition and so forth, other than the technical side of exposure, focus, and so forth. So I want to impress on you that what you're photographing in the first place is the most important decision, and one that will greatly improve your photography if you put yourself in the right places at the right times. And I also say here, panoramic photographs aren't gimmicks. They provide, it's just one more tool in the process of capturing great photographs. And all photographs, whether it be standard photographs or panoramic photographs, require good technique. I mean, that goes without saying. Now, what is panoramic photography? It's not very hard to explain. Basically, it's wide format photography with elongated horizontal fields of view. I think you have to have an aspect ratio of at least 2:1, two times wider than it is high, for it to be considered a panoramic photograph. And there are a number of different kinds of aspect ratios that are in standard photography as well as panoramic photography. I don't think I have to tell you about the variations that, depending on the camera systems you use and the like, regarding standard ratios, from square to, you know, every possibility. I spent some of my life photographing 35 millimeter, which of course those formats, 2x3 or 3x2, however you want to put it, are in 35 millimeter, are also in full frame digitals. So, when I went digital, I went full frame. So I was used to doing that. But in 1982, I actually switched from 35 millimeter to a Pentax 67 camera system, because using 2 1/4 by 2 3/4 inch slides gave me so much better quality. It's 4.5 times the size of a 35 millimeter. And I was frequently dissatisfied with the quality and the sharpness and the blow up capability I could get with a 35 millimeter. So I went 6x7 in 82 and did not change that for 25 years until 2007, when I bought my first serious digital camera, which was a Nikon D700. I still shoot Nikon. I still shoot digital Nikons. I own a I sold my D700 because my other cameras now are a D3X, a D810, and a D850. I do almost all my shooting now with the D810 and the D850. The D3X, despite being an $8,000 original camera, which I bought used for considerably less, I don't use that as much because it's bigger and heavier and doesn't have the resolution capability that a D810 or a D850 has. Now, panoramic ratios, I identified here 1x2, 6x17, 1x3, and 1x4. The 6x17 is what I fixed on immediately when I bought that panoramic camera, because that was the format of the Fuji G617. Interestingly enough, now that camera has a fixed lens. It's a normal lens, so you're getting you don't have the capability to interchange lenses. However, Fuji also makes a GX617, which has 3 interchangeable lenses, so you can go from wide to short telephoto, and so you can choose a lens that works best for the scene you want to photograph from where you are. And so it's a more versatile camera. But I thought that the G617 was a great way for me to get myself introduced to panoramic photography. Now, I started with the 6x17 format, and in fact, my small size panoramas are 6" by 17" images that I frame 12x23, double matte and frame 12x23. I sometime later realized I have images that just wouldn't work quite as well in a 6x17. So in some cases, I needed a little more vertical image. And so I then adopted a 7x17 format. And I later found out even that wasn't quite enough. And so I went to an 8.5x17 or a 1x2 format. And while still a large majority of my pictures are 6x17 formats, I had to have some in 7x17 and fewer still of the in the 1x2. So it's interesting. You could go to 1x3 exactly or 1x4. I've just never felt the need to do that. But I do collect photography books, and I have a photography book by someone who did at least 1x4. It might even be 1x5. The images are so wide. Now, there are a lot of ways to create panoramic photographs. I just mentioned about the Fuji cameras. There's also a Hasselblad X-Pan, and you probably have heard of that. It uses it's not you think Hasselblad must be a big camera system, right? Well, it's actually a camera that uses 35mm film, and it's been around a very long time, probably 30 or 40 years. And interestingly enough, it creates images that are on 35mm film, so it's 1 inch high by 2 3/4 inches wide. And interestingly enough, when I mentioned the I mentioned the Pentax 67 system I used. If you take a 110 or 220 film, and you crop the top and bottom down to make an image that is 1 inch by 2 3/4 inches, it does exactly what the Hasselblad X-Pan did, and probably still does for those who might still have it. I don't know if it's still marketed, but it's just kind of interesting to me. So I was starting to shoot panoramas from 6x7 slides that could easily have been shot exactly the same way in the Hasselblad X-Pan camera. Now, of course, point and shoot cameras say they take panoramas, but as you probably know, all they do is crop the picture you would be shooting otherwise, top and bottom, and so it makes it look like a panorama. Also, obviously, you can take single photographs, whether it be 35mm or 6x7s or more, or square images, and you can always crop them to panoramas. But a very popular technique, obviously, I know many of you may do this already, is to shoot multiple digital images, where you where you shoot them usually of a scene from left to right. You could take any number of images. If you shoot with vertical images, you can get 6 or 7 or 8 images that overlap at least 25%, and you can get a great panoramic photograph. Most people do it with vertical images, but I've also done some with 3 horizontal images, and that gives me a great panoramic photograph too. And the reason for doing this is very simple. It results in an image with much higher resolution and a much sharper image, which can yield much greater blow up capability. And that's important. I love to blow up things big, and I love to have customers who want things that are really large. And I'll give you an example of what a benefit this can be. Sometimes I go out when I shoot pictures. I don't know what I'm going to be getting, but when I see a scene that might be good as a standard image or a panorama, I might shoot it both as a single image of the entire scene using wide angle capability usually, or I could shoot it with multiple images overlapping and to give much greater resolution. And frequently I actually do both. Now that seems kind of silly, right? But the single image, when shot properly with a tripod and so forth, and with a camera that really has good resolution to start with. I mean, my 810 has 35 megapixel images, and my 850 has 45 megapixel images. So that gives great capability for nice blowups. But sometimes that's even not adequate. You still need to go larger. And so I would shoot images both ways in case I need to go much larger than what I would normally be satisfied with from a single image. Well, recently I had a customer who wanted a 6-foot wide, 72-inch wide panorama for an office. And I had a single image that I had worked with for that photograph before, but I'd also shot it with multiple images overlapping, and I had never done anything with those multiple images overlapping. Well, I tried to actually create a quality image that was 72 inches wide from the single image, and it didn't satisfy me. I have pretty high standards, to say the least, and it was not sharp enough, and I was not pleased. And so this is the only time I've done this. I've shot it that way with two ways of doing it with other photographs before, but I've never had to go to the other one if I hadn't already stitched it together. And so I found my original images, and if you've been shooting as much as I have for 53 years, that can be a challenge in and of itself. But I found my original images. They were digital, and I stitched them together, processed the image properly, and got the most amazing sharp 6-foot wide image of print that you can imagine. I was so excited, but that's the only time I've done that. But now I know that I may want to go back to my the images I've shot that way in the past and do more, process more of those that way, because I think the quality was just amazing. And unfortunately, I don't have that in the presentation. Not that this presentation could show you the quality of a 6-foot image very well. Now, there are a lot of different stitching software available in the market. You can see here, I guess about 18 or so, whatever the number. But I put and highlighted in darker, bold version Photoshop, because I've always stitched mine with Photoshop, and it's always worked very well. I know other people who swear by other things, by other software. I have a friend who used GUI GUI Pro quite often, and he was extremely pleased. I even took an image in Bryce Mountain National Park, Bryce Canyon, excuse me, National Park. I shot an image with 7 photographs wide, stitching, overlapping, and 4 rows down. So you can imagine the amazing number of photos. There's 28 photographs that had to be stitched together by the software. And I've never done that before and never done it since. But I wanted to try it. I had a little time on my hands waiting for the light to change. And I used Photoshop to take those 4 rows of 7 images each, and Photoshop stitched it all together just perfectly. And you can imagine how difficult it was to even shoot it. But I didn't know if Photoshop could even do that, but it did it. So it gives you an idea of how, and this was years ago. It's a much earlier version of Photoshop. So the newest versions are much better, of course, I'm sure. Now, equipment for shooting panoramas, obviously you need a camera. And here I say camera with leveling feature. We'll get into that in a little bit about how important it is to level everything when you're shooting images to stitch together for panoramas. Obviously, you need a lens, the tripod, and a head for your tripod. Ball head is what most people use, and many tripods and ball heads have leveling features. Sometimes I have actually a device I put underneath my ball head between it and the tripod that has a leveling feature, which I use, especially when I'm shooting panoramas. But you can also put things on your camera to level and so forth. I have something in my camera that allows me to check and see if my camera is level. But it's very important that you have everything level, and I'll explain that in a little bit more. I have L brackets on each of my cameras, and by having an L bracket on each camera, it makes it easier if you have your camera set up on your tripod, for example, horizontally. If you ever want to shoot vertical pictures, it's a very simple matter to take the camera off the ball head and off the tripod in ball head, excuse me, and just turn it vertically and put it right back in. And that lens will be shooting the exact same direction perfectly, like the way it did when it was horizontal. But you're now shooting vertical pictures. And this way, if you have an L bracket, you can shoot panoramic images to stitch together either horizontally or vertically, and you can do it so quickly. It's just so much easier that way. L brackets, if you don't use L brackets, they typically cost in the neighborhood of $125 to $150 each. I'm not telling you where you should buy them, but Really Right Stuff carries L brackets for almost every good camera made, and you'd never have a problem probably finding an L bracket for a full frame or probably mirrorless camera that's on the market. And the next point just identifies a reference to clamp and rail or a nodal rail if needed. And I'm going to be getting to that when I talk a little bit about the nodal point. I'm not going to give you a great lesson about how to set up your nodal point, but I am going to talk about some of the principles there. You'd have to take a whole class just to be able to read pages of material to understand and how to set up a nodal point, but it's not as hard as it may seem. And then finally, I mentioned a gigapan, which is a device that you can put on a camera and shoot images that will overlap each other, digital images that will overlap each other. And you can set it up so that you can identify the parameters of what you want photographed, the width and height, and how many images you want, and so forth and so on. And the gigapan will do it with the push of a button. And it's an amazing feature. I wish I had one, but it costs about, last time I looked, it cost over around $1,000. And I'd much rather do these things manually if at all possible. So it'd be nice to have a gigapan, but I enjoy the challenges involved shooting panoramas. Now, talking about when you're shooting a multiple image panorama with a digital camera, let's talk about the things you want to have to make decisions about. Now, first, again, I'm going to say you want your tripod, the top of your tripod, the ball head, and your camera all perfectly level. And the reason that's important is this: you're going to have to rotate your camera. You're going to have to move it, shift it left to right, with it overlapping each of the images. And if everything's not perfectly level, then the pictures you take will not be all level and not be fitting together well. They'll maybe start at the top on the left at the top and go down to a bottom right as you take the pictures to the right, all the way to the right as you turn your camera. Or it could work the other way. You've got to have everything level, and that takes some practice, but it can be done, and it's very important. It's a critical thing to do. The next thing to do is to have to make a decision whether you want to use vertical or horizontal images. The reason most people use vertical is because it gives you more images for a panorama or for a standard image, for that matter, and a standard horizontal image. And by shooting more images that you overlap, you're going to get higher resolution, higher than horizontal images will give you for a panorama. Because imagine putting together 7 images overlapping for 6 or 7 versus 2 or 3 for horizontal images that are overlapping, and you can see the resolution is going to be much higher if you go vertical. But you could do horizontal even sometimes a little faster. If things are changing fast, it might give you enough of what you're seeking for the picture that you want, especially if the weather's changing, if there's movement of various kinds, if there's those kinds of problems in your shooting and the scene. And then you want to determine the actual composition of the final image, and because you got to set all this up with your camera and tripod and so forth. You need to obviously select your lens and focal length you want to use. I find it, I have a 24-70 Nikon zoom lens that I use a lot. I used to use it about 90% of my photography. Then I started shooting wildlife, and then I bought Nikon's new 80-400 millimeter lens, and now I probably shoot half my pictures with the 80-400 and half on the 24-70. But I always thought 70 to 80 millimeters, somewhere in that range, is a great range for a lot of the panoramas you shoot when you're shooting verticals that overlap. But you might need something a little longer or a little wider, so you'll have to make that decision. And then you have to make, as you see here, I bolded this sentence, determine if a foreground requires use of a nodal point. If so, set the predetermined nodal point. Now, what's important here is this, and I'm going to talk a little more about nodal points. But if you're shooting a scene, panoramic scene, as you frequently may do with mountains or rivers or other things that are some distance from you, some real distance from you, you don't have to worry about a foreground being close to you, or a foreground or lines in a foreground that might not, as you turn their camera and as you rotate it around for images that you're going to overlap. If you don't have a foreground it's close to you with lines, you're not going to have the problem of trying to get those lines perfectly in register on the different images that they may be included. Because as you're overlapping, you're going to have these things, these same images, and if they're in a foreground close to you, then you're going to have a problem, and you have to deal with nodal points. If that's not the case, if you don't have a foreground close to you, and you don't have these lines that you have to worry about in them, whatever they may be, it could be a fence, could be a road, could be almost anything, then you can shoot it without worrying too much about a nodal point, because it's not going to be a problem. So keep that in mind, and we'll discuss a little more. Then I've said here, you need to set, this is very critical, the exposure, the focus, and the white balance settings on your camera. For all the pictures, you need to set it manually, because you can't take any chances of these things changing. If you set these things on automatic for your camera, and then you're rotating your camera, and each time you press, the camera may be trying to set a different exposure or focus differently or have a different white balance based on what the new part of the scene that you're photographing. Then if you let the camera do that and they choose different ones, then you're not going to have a picture that's going to work together and blend together perfectly. So you got to figure it out before you start to shoot the overlapping images. You got to figure out what your exposure needs to be, what your focus needs to be, and what your white balance needs to be. And you could do all that before you do anything else. And then you'll know how to set your camera, and you'll know that you can get all the pictures working together. And without any differences between the different images or that overlap. And then, of course, you've got to do the last thing, and that's shoot a series of photographs, whether it be vertical or horizontal, each of which overlaps the prior images by at least 25%. It doesn't hurt to do it by a third or 40%. Just make sure they overlap decently, because that's how if they don't overlap, then you're in trouble. And it can happen. It happened to me once. And I don't know how I messed that up, but I did. So I urge you to be real careful about enough of an overlap. Excuse me 1 second. I'm just going to we started late, and I've been talking a little more than I expected. So I'm not going to go much here into the nodal point, because I've already told you the important elements, and that is if there's a foreground and lines closer to the camera, then you have to figure out how to determine the nodal point. And it's critical to do that. You can Google nodal point. You can look at Really Right Stuff's website. You can look at a lot of sources, and they'll explain what you do and how to do it. If I can figure out how to do it, trust me, you can do it. And because I thought it would be so hard. It wasn't nearly as hard as I thought it would be. You might have to purchase one piece of equipment to put your camera on over the ball head. And if that's the case, then it can be a smart decision, because it makes it easier to determine what is referred to as the nodal point for the lens, or the no parallax point, or the optical center. And all three terms mean basically the same thing. Now let's talk about, let's see some pictures and the different ways that you can create panoramas. And I'll try to move more quickly. Now, obviously, I'd like to show you a few first that were shot with my Fuji G617. And I showed you this one first because this was the first one I ever shot, and it was one of my most successful shooting with that camera. And I couldn't be more pleased with it. By the way, the Fuji G617 is a tough camera to use because it's not an SLR, so it's a rangefinder, and you have to set the rangefinder in such a way that you could possibly be looking into it in a way that you get too much above or too much below, and you really need some practice with it to be able to get an image that is in such great register like this image. This is exactly what I wanted. But I believe me when I tell you I've ruined photographs shooting with that camera, which I no longer own anymore. And it's because it was so difficult to get everything in framed exactly the way I wanted. Now, this is a picture I shot on the University of Virginia lawn. The image was shot with the camera, and the detail in this picture is just amazing. I could blow it up as big as a building. This camera produces such quality. I could blow it up in the size of a building, and you'd be just blown away by the sharpness of it. And this is a picture I shot at Ashland. Well, it used to be. I shouldn't have said Ashland Highland here. They changed the name back to Highland. That was the original name. And this is President Monroe's home. This is the road leading to the home. It's my favorite road in the world. I have photographed it many, many times over the years in different ways, and it's just beautiful. And the reason why it used to be called Ashland Highland is because all these trees are ash trees. So now the next way to do it is to obviously use multiple digital images and stitch them together. So I have several examples of each of these methods. This is a photograph of the Rivanna River that flows through Charlottesville. Most people would say that you can't photograph or something that's moving like this with digital images that are overlapping, because the water could change from one image to the other where they overlap, and then what's the camera going to do? It's going to have a problem, all kinds of problems. But this image worked out as beautifully as I could have hoped. And it was shot with 6 or 7 images that were overlapping at least 25%. Now, this is a skyline of Richmond. It's shot from the flood wall. That's what it was. It's the flood wall is across the river, downtown on the south side of the James River. And capture something at dusk when you get the lights on in the buildings. You really have a lot of potential for a great image. And this was shot actually from Blue Ridge Parkway, the second overlook south of Afton Mountain, which is where 64 crosses and 250 crosses. And this is an overlap overlook that's tough to shoot now because of some overgrowth, although they're trying to take care of that in a lot of the overlooks. And this was shot early one morning, just after the sun rose above the horizon. And it was shot with at least 7 images, I believe. Now, I have shot a couple of photographs that were shot on a 35mm camera, and that I cropped to a panorama. I only have one here to show you because it's not something I did very often, but I was amazed at the quality of this one because I shot this photograph with a 35mm borrowed camera while I was sitting on the ground and no tripod, and trying to hold that camera as still as possible with the sun setting and getting ready to go below the horizon. And it worked out beautifully. Of course, I got a standard 35mm image, which I then cropped to this panorama. And I like both images. This is another good example of where a standard image and the cropped image to a panorama both work extremely well. Then, as I explained before, a lot of my medium format Pentax 67 images, either slides or negatives, were capable of being cropped to a panorama, just like the size of the X-Pan. And this is an image I shot at Chincoteague. from the second floor balcony of a bed and breakfast. And this is a natural scene. There is no red filter involved. I walked out and saw this and just about freaked out, as you can imagine. Couldn't believe what I was seeing. And I shot this, excuse me, right after the sun had gone down. And the sky was red like that, as high as I could see. And cropped to a panorama, it actually captures, I think, the most important elements of the picture, and that is these three piers. If I had asked someone to where, if I had been given a chance to put those three piers out in the water, I could not have placed them any better. And that's one of the things that attracted me so much to the picture, in addition to the color. But you need some sky too. So this is one scene. While I have a panoramic version, I think it works better in the standard version. And this is Little Stony Creek in Giles County, Virginia, near Pembroke. It's a wonderful river, and there's a bridge that goes across it, from which I've taken this picture and many others over the years. It's downriver from a waterfall called the Cascades, which you may be familiar with. It's a beautiful waterfall, and lake pond below it. But I love the river. And this is, I've got beautiful pictures here like these in the spring. I've also done it in the fall. And when you crop this to a panorama, it looks very different. And this is another image where I really like it as a panorama. But as you can imagine, because of the lower part of the picture, I like the standard version better, but I still like the panorama. And this was shot in Shenandoah National Park. And it was at a place where I also have a photograph with two trees in the image. I shot those first, and then I had only had a couple frames left, and to shoot fast. And as you can see, the sun's starting to go below one of the ridges. And the standard version is really nice, but sometimes when you see mountain ridges, you think panoramas, don't you? And I think it looks really great as a panorama too. And now we're talking about full frame digital camera being used to take single images that are then cropped to panoramas, just like I did with that 35mm or the Pentax 67 images, in this case from a full frame digital image. And I have shot many a scene where the sun was pouring light through the clouds, and invariably you take photographs and you take multiple exposures, and you rarely get the light to really show up in the image like this one. And this is the only one I've really ever gotten that I've been just fallen in love with, and I've tried it many a time. I didn't like the dark part in the upper portion of the sky, so I've created a standard version where I cropped that very dark portion as well as the two sides, and created another nice standard version. But I also think it makes a great panorama, as I hope you will agree. And I love the contrast. I love how the light shows up, and I just think it's a beautiful image. Now, this is an image that I frequently refer to as my new favorite. It's an image of a tree in Shenandoah National Park. It's just south of Big Meadows, on the other side of the street from Big Meadows. And there's some parking area there for several cars, or probably about 8 to 10 cars maybe. And I went there many times to try to get a good photograph, and I was having problems getting a good one, because I knew that the sun would set behind the picture, behind the tree. But I kept going, and I kept having trouble finding a good image or a good sunset to go with it. And so finally, about the 10th try over about a 10-year period, I went back another day, waited till after the sun went below the horizon. Every other photographer left. I thought I was the only one who knew about this tree. All the other photographers left. And then this glow started at the bottom part of the picture. And I got a panorama that I love even more than the standard, but I love both of them, and I've used them many times. And this is a featured picture in my book, as you can imagine. There's a place in North Carolina called Matamesquite National Wildlife Refuge. And it's a wonderful place. I had seen a picture that some other photographer took of these trees in the water. The picture didn't impress me that very much, but I was thinking it might be a great place to go photograph. And I went there a few years ago, and I got out there before the sun came up. And by the way, I'm a bit of a bird whisperer. This is one of several pictures I have where I was photographing a beautiful scene and a flock of birds flew into my picture when I was photographing. And I don't mind that happening at all. But this is, I'm sorry, the ones I have now, some of them I'm only going to show the panoramic version, like this one. This is a scene I shot in Glacier National Park, and I love the picture, especially with those rocks in the foreground, below the water, different colors, they're sharp. I used a polarizer to help reduce any reflection there, and I just got this fantastic image at first light, very early in the morning. It takes an hour from the regular portion of Glacier to get to this lake to be able to get pictures like this. So I was up very early that morning. And I love this picture even more than the panorama, but the panorama is not bad either, but the rocks just make a huge difference. But this is more of a classic panorama where you've got the division right through the middle horizontally, and your perfect reflection top and bottom, or bottom. This is a photograph I shot in West Virginia in the fall. I drove up to the Dolly Sods wilderness area, which is a wonderful place to photograph. And I had no idea when I got there that there would be this fog. And I didn't know what the color was going to be like. And I came up there, I got up there, and I walked out in these bushes, and they were soaking wet from the fog. And when I walked out, I was dripping from my neck down, but I didn't care because I got this picture and an awfully good panoramic version as well. And just by cropping. And this is an Albemarle County farm. You can imagine that I was attracted to with the sky color, and I've used it as a standard picture almost entirely. But recently I thought, I really love the farm and the fence. I love that fence and so forth. And I thought maybe if I turned it into a different kind of panorama, like a 1x2. Then maybe it would look good that way too. And I've decided that it does look pretty good that way, but it creates a different perspective on the scene. So it's kind of nice that you can have two different perspectives of the same scene, and both are just as valid as the other. Each one is as valid as the other. So let me show you those again. Everything's the same except for the amount of sky. Whoops. Okay, there we go. Okay, I'd like to talk a little bit about composition. We're getting near the end of the presentation, although I have some more pictures I want to show you. But these are two people, Joseph Meehan and Lee Frost, who have done panoramic books. So these people know about panoramas. And they said, each of them said something that I just could not agree with at all. Of course, Joseph Meehan said that the essence of the composition should be parallel to the long side of the format. Well, I've got pictures that don't work that exactly like that, but so I think you need to be more flexible than that. And Lee Frost said, if a scene suits panoramic format, it won't be successful in any other. Well, I think I've already proven that that's not true, because I've got a lot of pictures that work well both ways. So just my opinion. I don't hesitate to disagree with someone, no matter what their credentials are, if it's something that I don't believe in. There are a lot of rules of composition for panoramic photographs. I would just like to mention a few things here. I think these so-called rules are made to be broken, but these rules are things that are good to know, in my opinion. And so in some cases, I think panoramic photography, with its limitations on the vertical nature of them, does create some problems. For example, the negative space frequently wouldn't work nearly as well, especially with something in the lower part of the picture, because you don't have as much negative space up near the top. The rule of thirds could work, but only in one dimension, not both dimensions. But I think the rule of thirds is still worth looking at in that perspective. I think because they're cropped frequently, because the nature of the images are narrow the way they are, I think you will tend to fill the frame. And I think that's a good idea too. But I also believe you need to have a little room to breathe, for an image to breathe. I think too many people crop too tightly. So I think it's something worth considering. I think balance is an issue that may be more difficult with Panorama. Diagonals, I think, can work. And I've got a picture that proves that, I think. Leading lines, I think, can work. But framing with other subject matters, the way people do with trees and branches and what have you, I think that's going to be a bit of a problem. And I don't like framing that much anyway, even when you do it on a standard picture. I've had some people disagree with me about that, but that's just my personal opinion. I think it's overdone. And with foreground objects, I think that can be more difficult too, because you don't have as much verticality to the image. And are there subjects or compositions that won't work? I think that's possible, but I don't think you know until you try it. So give it a shot and then you'll know. And these are some of my images, some more of my images. I think some classic compositions, some different. This is a river in Tidewater, Virginia. And it's actually managed by the Nature Conservancy. This is a hillside in Syria, Virginia, which is just east of the Shenandoah National Park. And I caught it at a beautiful time in the fall. And I love capturing trees this way. I've done it with aspens and birch trees and giant sequoias and other trees. I think it creates a wonderful image. This is shot at Eastern Shore National Wildlife Refuge, which is the first place you get to when you cross the Chesapeake Bay Bridge Tunnel and you go over to the Eastern Shore. First thing you get to on the right. And these wetlands, I was shooting another scene nearby, and then I turned 90 degrees and I saw this. I hadn't even noticed it, and I just couldn't believe I had missed it. And you can even shoot panoramas of wildlife, and especially birds. And I love to shoot wildlife now, and I love to shoot birds, the big birds especially. And I'll show you a few pictures. Obviously herons and nesting in Richmond, right in downtown Richmond on the James River. This osprey was landing with his dinner or lunch, as this case may be, and I thought it worked out still well with a panorama, especially with those big wings of the osprey. Mallard ducks at Chincoteague, Eastern Shore. If you ever want to shoot birds, Chincoteague is a wonderful place to go. It's a national wildlife refuge. Another osprey at Lee Sylvania State Park with 2 babies still in the nest. And this mom was going out and bringing stuff back, not food for them, but more nesting materials. I thought that was really kind of interesting. I guess ospreys are just trained, or just have the genetics say they have to keep building. And they build bigger nests than eagles do. And so it's, I guess that's just built into them. But each time that she flew off, these babies kept looking at her, trying to wonder where their food is, I think. It sure seemed that way anyway. This is a flock of willets along the Assateague Island National Seashore. You may not be aware that Assateague Island has a national seashore, and it's right there at Chincoteague. And it took me a while to figure out who these birds, and I'm pretty sure they're willets. I've done some research, but I'm going to find some expert yet who will tell me whether I'm right or wrong. And wood ducks at the Dutch Gap Conservation Area, which is in Chesterfield County. Only time I've ever seen wood ducks is at this place at Dutch Gap Conservation Area. And they are such beautiful, the male has such beautiful coloring, as I'm sure you're aware. And there was another male around who was interested in this female, and that was interesting to watch. And I'm just going to go through some of my other pictures quickly. This is an image that's very dear and close to my heart, as is this standard image here. It just like the last one, the standard images have much more at the top of the picture. And this one does as well, but they both work really well as panoramas, in my opinion. This is at Grayson Highland State Park in Grayson County in Southwest Virginia. It's like Canada there, as you can tell by these trees and with just the right touch of fog. This is becoming my best-selling photograph, even more than my great blue heron in that blue picture I showed you at first. People just love this picture, and it was shot in color. It was processed in color, and it was printed in color. But the snowstorm I was shooting in was so intense, it turned it into what looks like a black and white pen and ink drawing. This is a boats on a cove in Maine, about an hour before sunrise. They were lit only by a single light bulb on a post at the cove, and it took almost a 1 minute exposure to get this picture. And if you look at it, you may not think about this, but I think about it a lot. Not a single boat was moving for almost a minute. And you know how rare that is. There must have been absolutely zero wind, and I got really lucky. Birch trees in Acadia National Park. Told you I loved photographing trees this way. This is from the top shot from the top of Waya Bald, which is near Franklin, North Carolina. You can drive up to the top. You may not see this scene because this happened after 2 days of rain, creating the fog in the lower elevations, and then the high pressure system started clearing out the sky and created such a beautiful image. But it's only good for sunrise, sunset, or the sunset picture from the other direction you can't get anymore because of vegetation. This is a pond in Standardsville. I drove through the city one day. I took my compass and figured out the sun rises behind the pond, and I went back there 3 times to photograph sunrise. Back Bay National Wildlife Refuge, which is south of Virginia Beach. And then when you get clouds like this and reflections like this, you know you're going to shoot pictures. Tangier Island, a place I've been to probably 5 times. This is the only moonrise I ever photographed, and Tangier Island is very special. And these are flowering fruit trees in the spring in Syria, Virginia, which is not far from those other colorful trees just east of Shenandoah National Park. And this is a photograph in Rockbridge County near Lexington. And I was driving with a friend and we saw this, and I yelled, "Stop." And I jumped out and took pictures. And if you look very carefully, there are a lot of cows that are moving. I've never seen a sky do this. That's what attracted me. And then I realized those cows were moving as I was photographing. And in 5 minutes, they all were just on the other side of the fence right in front of me because they all thought I brought dinner. But look at that sky. I've never seen sun rays like that after the sun's gone down. And you may be familiar with this tree at Raven's Roost on the Blue Ridge Parkway. It's probably the most photographed tree in Virginia. And I'd like to just point out a couple things here that you should remember. Polarizing filters can be a real problem with panoramic photography because, as you know, the polarizing effect in the blue sky peaks at 90 degrees away from the sun. And so in that case, you're not going to have consistent blue color in the sky. And you won't without the filter either, but the filter will accentuate that difference. And so you have to be real careful with polarizers in sky when you're shooting a panorama. Some cameras like the Fuji G617 has light fall off toward the corners, and I had to have a center spot neutral density filter on the lens at all times, which evened out the illumination and removed the dark area around the sides, around the edges. And then subject movement in a stitched image can be a problem. I once photographed a lake in Colorado, and there was a duck in that lake, and I was shooting pictures across the lake. And that single duck appeared in 3 times in my panorama because he kept moving in the direction I was moving that camera. So you have to be careful about any subject movement. And don't forget, you have to manually determine the exposure, the focus, and the white balance. absolutely critical. The parallax problems alluded to with the nodal point. And then if you have a rangefinder panoramic camera, you could have flare issues that you wouldn't know about because you're not looking through the lens like with an SLR. And finally, I just want to say, just remember, panoramic photographs are not the solution to fix bland images. If you're not shooting a scene that's worthy, a panoramic photograph is not going to make it worthy. The format of a panoramic photograph can be somewhat of a problem in terms of but it can help you remove things from an image that shouldn't be there and that take away from the picture. So it can give you that kind of benefit. And I want you to consider panoramic photographs as just another tool that requires you to do all the right things to take a great picture. And making it a panorama is not going to make it the kind of picture that you want it to be. But it is a tool to use, and I think sometimes it's a tool that works exceptionally well. And that's the end of my presentation. Let's see if I can get back to everybody.
Hey, looking in the chat, I don't see any questions that have been posted in chat. Does anybody have any questions or feedback for Ben?
I may have put everybody to sleep.
I doubt that.
I'm trying to figure out how to get
I have a
back to
question.
my original scene. Oh, I think I know. Let's see.
I got it. I got a question too.
Yes.
Who do you want to do
Okay, I'll go.
first?
Yeah, this isn't, doing a panorama with a iPhone, you get a long skinny image. No big surprise there. Then what I noticed was when I took that image into Facebook and shared it with someone via their messenger app, all of a sudden this long skinny picture was interactive and you could move around and look at the picture interactively. I was wondering if you're familiar with that and what might be the means by which that's possible.
I actually am not familiar with that. When you say interactive, how can you explain that?
Well, if you if you look at a non-interactive static image, if you wanted to look at different parts of it, then you would I guess use your slider bars for horizontal and vertical to change what part of the picture you're looking at. But in this situation, in this app, you can actually move your point of view without doing that. It's like you can just as though you had the camera and were going through from one side of the image to the other, up and down, like if you've ever used Google Street View, that's 360, and I know there are specialized cameras for that, but this is that kind of functionality, but within a given existing pano shot that you've done with an iPhone. Anybody familiar with that? I think it's a very cool thing, especially, I was going to places and sharing it. There was one friend who's kind of house bound, and he looked at it, and it was, and he was looking around. It was at the bottom of Mount Athabasca up in Canada, and he's like, man, it's just like being there, looking over this way and then over that way and up and down, and it was very cool. And I just
Jack,
with the yeah.
I'm kind of familiar with that, but because I've taken panos with my iPhone. If you actually look at it on your computer and just click it without sharing it, it just looks like a thin strip, like you said. But if you share it on social media, some of the social media platforms like Facebook can do what you're talking about, where you can put your mouse on there and you can move it around. And I think it's the app that makes it do that. I don't think it's in the photograph. I think it's the app.
Oh, I agree. It's something that's on top of what's the software that's presenting the image. I just didn't know if it was something that's, you know, available as a kind of add-on to regular photographers' activities. Oh,
I
sounds
wish I
like
could help you.
I got more homework to do. I'll report back at some point.
I had a question.
Yes.
What do you think of the, and forgive me if I don't pronounce it correctly, but and it's named after a gentleman, the Brennezer method.
The what?
Brennezer, it's a photographer that wanted to get a wide angle shot of a scene. So what he does is it's a shallow depth of field, but he takes different pictures and then has them stitched together, which will give the effect of a wide angle scene. It's the man's name is Brennizer, and the method is named after him.
How is the method different from what I described?
Well, it would probably use a shallow depth of field, and it gives the image the appearance of a wider frame. So it doesn't necessarily have to be a panoramic, but it's a bunch of images stitched together.
But is the foreground and the background typically out of focus with something in focus in the middle?
Somewhat.
I'm not familiar with the photographer or the name.
His name
But,
is,
if
his
you like
name-
things with shallow depth of fields, that's always been somewhat popular,
yeah, I'm trying to
whether
explain
you
it best
whether
I
you stitch
can.
or not.
Well, his name is Ryan Brennizer, Brennizer, and he came up with this method of stitching images, and he hand holds them. He doesn't put it on a tripod. He holds them and moves around the camera quickly. So, but he overlaps quite a bit, and then he stitches the image, which gives it the image kind of a wider angle effect with a shallow depth of field. I don't know how else to explain it.
Apologize for not being familiar with that either. Does anybody have a question that I might be able to answer?
I'm sorry.
So we do have a couple of questions in the chat of, how much post-processing do you do on your images? Have a standard workflow?
Actually, I probably do a lot less than most people. I'm probably one of the few photographers who does as much photography as I do, who does not use Lightroom. I mean, I've used Photoshop for many, many years. And then I've just developed a process that works for me. And then when Lightroom came out, I just didn't feel like it gave me anything, because the processing capabilities of Lightroom are all included in Camera Raw. So I've always used Bridge to identify the images I want to work with. Of course, this all comes with Photoshop. Use Bridge to identify the images to work with. I then do the initial processing in Camera Raw, which has the same tools. It doesn't have the management of the system that Lightroom has, but it has the same tools for processing. And then I do final touch-ups with some things in Photoshop. And because Photoshop has better selection tools than Lightroom has. And so, but I don't do nearly as much processing as a lot of people do. I'll bet the average amount of time I might process a single image be anywhere from 5 to 15 minutes. The
Okay.
key for me is being at the right place at the right time to get the kinds of photographs I'm looking for.
Great, thank you for that. And another question from the chat: do you have a favorite for shooting panoramas? Katie, do you have a clarification on that question? A favorite, like spot, technique, tools?
Format camera.
Well, the actual camera being a panoramic camera?
Yeah,
I think the Fujis I was talking about are great, but I did not like the viewfinder at all. I much prefer SLRs. I always have, and so I'm a real stickler with those. Maybe I just could never master those viewfinders. So I think the approach these days is if you want to get high quality, is to shoot multiple images, overlapping them and stitching them together, and that's how you get the best quality. But it's got to be under the right circumstances, like I described, in terms of avoiding things like movement. If clouds are moving, that can be a problem if your clouds are important to your picture and so forth. So I think that's a great way. And if you can't get that kind of can't use that approach, I love digital photography. I didn't think I would years ago, but I love it and get great digital pictures. And I think you can make panoramas or anything else you want out of them, but especially with the kind of resolution capability you now have in digital cameras. I mean, these 35 and 45 and 50 megapixel cameras just give you such unbelievable quality.
Okay.
And cropping capability, shall I say.
Hi, Ben. This is Howie. I'd like to ask you a question. Have you ever take the photograph with the fisheye and turn it on to a panoramic?
I've never done any fisheye photography. I like the real world being real, and so I don't do some of the things that the way some people push the envelope with lenses or other things. I like to show off the natural world.
Thank you.
Hey, any other questions?
If you have any, you can feel free to send me an email. My email address is easy to remember. It's ben@bengreenberg.com.
Okay,
Ben?
I will. Because I did take some photo from a distance with fisheye and turn it to panoramic once, and I think that looks okay.
I might also say that if you want to see 900 of my photographs, standard and panoramas, I have a website which is bengreenberg.com, and Greenberg is ERG. And I also have a book website as well, which you can be directed to from my regular website.
Yes, I will. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey, any other questions from anybody?
One more quick question for me. What ND filters do you use?
I only carry 2 filters these days. In the old days, I had so many filters, and boy, I still have them, because what can I do with them now? Ranging anywhere from 50 millimeters to 82 millimeters, or I even have a 95, I think. But I only use 2 now. One's a polarizer, because when you want to reduce reflections or bring out the color better in plant life or whatever. You can't, it's hard to beat a polarizer or to darken the sky a little bit. I try not to make skies look unreal. And I have a variable neutral density filter. It's a wonderful filter. It's not inexpensive, but it's a wonderful filter because it gives me the ability to darken my image anywhere from 1 to 10 stops. And by being able to do that, I can bring out the movement of water and make it appear silky smooth. I've done that in the ocean or beaches. I've done it in waterfalls and in rivers and what have you. You probably noticed that in a couple of my pictures. There are other times you want to slow things down, and you want to so you need a neutral density filter too. And so this gives you a great variable capability. And since all my lenses, except for my 14 to 24, my two major lenses, the 24 to 70 and the 80 to 400, they both use 77 millimeter filters. So all I need is one of each. I don't need to worry about step up rings or step down rings or anything else. And so those are the two filters I use, and they both do a really good job.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
John, I don't see anything else in the chat.
Nothing else in the chat? Any last minute questions from anybody else on the bridge?
Well, Ben, I want to thank you for hanging in there when we had technical problems. I'm sorry that it took us so long to figure it out, but we got through it anyway.
We did, and I want to thank everybody for your patience and hopefully not falling asleep. And in my lengthy presentation, sometimes I get started and it's hard to stop. But I love photography, and I'm really serious. If you ever have any questions, feel free to contact me at any time or check out my website. We do whatever. I love to help people enjoy photography.
Great. All right. With that, we're going to wrap up tonight's recording.